Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast. We have our quad session today with George from Flex Success, and we're going to have a super cool conversation about periodization, PED use in a comp prep, but also off the back of a prep, how you would potentially change how you use PEDs. And then, as we always do, George, going on the organic flow of covering lots of different topics under this umbrella. So thank you for coming on today.
Always a pleasure, Sarah. Thank you for having me back again, fourth time in.
No problem. Like I said before, it's really nice for people to get to know the guests, and we've had some really good feedback from you coming on the pod. I had actually someone that I think her boyfriend was coached by you, and she actually messaged me saying she'd listened to one of the pods we did together. She said you two have literally saved my life, and it was like, wow, I forgot to tell you. But it's definitely something I reflect on with the podcast. People listen, and because it's open and honest, and we touch on subjects that maybe people don't get access to, it does make a massive difference to people that are competing or bodybuilding.
It's the impact we have. With podcasts, you don't really realize until you get feedback like that, the scope of who you've reached. But that is fantastic to hear. That is really epic. Is she a competitor herself?
I think she's going to delve into it. I can't remember if she competes or not, but yeah, I was sort of taken back. I was meant to tell you, but I'm telling you now.
Right.
It's
You've been in a prep hole. It's fine.
yeah. Talking of prep, we've both done our preps for this year now, and we just touched base beforehand about going into off season and the transition there, because it's something that I've spoken on the pod about quite a lot recently, because of course so many people are entering this phase, and it's such a crazy time, isn't it? And we both have it as experienced competitors as well.
It's one of the hardest transitions of all prep. Like that post-comp window, it's first-time competitors don't really understand what they're kind of letting themselves in for, and there will be unicorns that kind of seem to breeze through it, and they'll talk on Instagram about how easy it was, or perhaps they're even lying to Instagram just to make themselves look like they've managed it well. But for the most part, your head's going to be all over the place. You're not going to know whether you're coming, you're going, whether you want food, whether you don't want food, whether you want to train, whether you don't want to train. There's so many physiological adaptations occurring, we can go female specific in the hormonal adaptations that need to be addressed. Even in male perspective, we talk about PED users. There's a lot that needs to be addressed in the post-comp window that are going to leave you in a state of stale, almost vibrating with no accurate direction as to where you think you're heading.
Yeah.
And psychologically and mentally as well, we've spoken about before the mental side of post-comp.
Yeah.
It's a whirlwind. You're fighting yourself constantly.
Yeah, it's that, like you touched on there, like almost, am I on track? Because for so long you're chasing scale weight going down, you're checking photos changing every week, all of the things that are contributing to you getting leaner and getting to stage. And then suddenly it's like, okay, so should I just accept gaining weight, looking fluffier, as we call it, inverted commas? And then it's like, should I enjoy life? Should I go for a meal? Should I do this? Should I do that? Things like training, the cardio's dropped out for most people. You might keep a little bit in, so that's a chunk of your day. The steps might reduce, that's another chunk of your day, and all of these things. And then you've got more free time, and of course that free time, you're sat with your thoughts and feelings of how well you did, what you're going to do moving forward. Are you going to compete again? All of these things, and it's like you're imprisoned in this mind.
Yeah, it's almost like a personality issue as well, personality disorder, because you're trying to figure out who you are. Because for the last X amount of weeks, 30 weeks, however long it's been, you have been this prep robot that's got this big definitive goal. And once the goal is achieved, the empty feeling you get post that, it's very easy for people to try and fill that void with, I'm going to jump back into the off season and try and start progressing, and they end up burning out really quickly, massive amounts of fatigue setting in, they spin their wheels and inevitably crash and burn at the end of that. Or they come out of it and try and do it correctly and just feel lost and don't know where they're going. And like you said, you're watching scale weight come down, you're watching your body improve. Now you've kind of got to go back the other way. And we don't like seeing those changes. And the illusion of how your physique's changing, your perception of it, is so skewed because of the emotional and physiological fluctuations you go through on a day-to-day basis. Like one day you wake up and be like, oh, yeah, I look really good. Next day you're crying, looking at yourself in the mirror. But you don't look any different really from one day to the next. Nothing's changed but this. It is a torturous time for even the seasoned competitor.
Yeah, and it's like, things like off-plan meals, we've spoken about it before outside of the pod, how your body can react and how you can see your body if you've had an off plan and then you've had some more sodium or these things that, contribute to off-plan meals, and then the next day you think, I don't feel very good, and then straight away you're saying, I'm not going to look very good, and then you're like, should I have an off plan? And then this all whirls round in your head, and it can be a very solo endeavor, and it's very hard to be open and honest. And like, as we always do, if you're a client, I would always say, open up about that, be honest about that, talk it through, think about the bigger picture here. And going into off season and coming off the back of a prep, it's about creating memories, reconnecting with friends and family. Like, it's so important. It's so cathartic, isn't it, when you can just sit down and have a nice meal?
Yeah, yeah. The little things you don't appreciate, you really, really don't.
Yeah.
Uh, the whole kind of prep itself was an environment for perhaps negative food behaviors to kind of develop.
Yeah.
And if they have started to, when you come to that post-comp window, that's an even further exaggeration on that environment that could create these poor food relationships and bad behaviors. So managing it accordingly is, we put such a there's such a big definitive kind of, we have to nail the post-comp window. But
Yeah.
realistically, it's actually a time for a little bit more leniency, not necessarily in saying, right, you can go out and eat food every single day, but it's about reintroducing those aspects of life, like the physical relationships with people, getting in touch with your loved ones again, and reconnecting, that are going to make it so much easier. And communication is one of the biggest things you touched on there.
Mm.
Communication, voicing how you feel, voicing those emotions, because they are normal and we have to talk about them. And talking about them is, that old saying, a problem shared is a problem halved. Correct, it is.
Yeah.
So talk with your coach. Do
Mm.
not hide things from your coach. That's their job. And if they're not supporting you in that aspect in the post-com window, find a new coach. I'll say
Yeah.
that now, because that is a biggest part of our job in that post-com window is support. That's what we're there for. We can set the plan, we can set the timeline, we can make it as appropriate as necessary, but communication and support is that most important thing that's going to get you through that phase appropriately.
Yeah, for sure. And you can talk through options as well, like if someone has invited you out, or, you're not sure and what have you. I've had clients where sometimes they've been invited for a meal, and actually then they're at a point where it's better to look through the menu with them, ask them what their preferences are. And then we can, you can even track these things if you're not at a point where you want off plan and you can't track that. If you still want to track, feel like you're staying on track, as it were, there's options there. So having a coach and leaning on them is super, super important. And also being open and honest to your friends and family with how you're feeling and what you're comfortable with, because this is your journey.
Yeah, and not being afraid to say no as well.
Yeah. Mm.
It's a double-edged sword, because you do need to kind of make you can very easily fall into that hermit crab hole of just reclusing yourself and very lonely, which makes it a lot worse than a mental state. But you need to be able to also say no to certain things. Like, people will put some pressure on you because they'll think, oh, he or she's done with prep now, oh, they can do this now, they can eat this now. Perhaps, maybe not. There's a limit to what we can get introduced, and over time that's gonna grow and get larger, and the leniencies are gonna increase.
Yeah.
But practice being able to say no to people. Like, you've been saying no to them all prep. If you're not comfortable going out and not tracking an off-plan meal and you feel pressure to do so, say no. You don't need to feel any pressure externally. There's already going to be enough pressure internally from yourself.
Yeah.
So find ways to reconnect with people, but in a way that's comfortable for you. Don't
Yeah.
create any abnormal stress.
Yeah, for sure. And it feeds in as well to, talking about how we're going to talk about periodization of PEDs. And off the back of that, your coach, if you are an assisted athlete, should be talking to you about things like after the show, what you're going to do with PEDs and how that's going to work, and just being that open communication all the time. Because I think that across all of these areas we're discussing today, and bodybuilding as a whole, if you can't communicate with your coach about all of these things and have plans in place, whether it's, I'm going to have off plan meals, I'm going to change my training plan, you want to know ahead of the game. Quite often, more often than not, bodybuilders want targets. We want to know, we want figures, we want facts, we want to know where we're heading, don't we?
Completely. And that's one of the biggest factors in periodizing an appropriate timeline, and not just looking short term at the acute of, I mean, we can draw back the lens completely now and talk through periodization. Like, the
Yeah.
main aspect in that post show window is, like you said, understanding where you are and having an idea of the direction you're heading.
Mm.
That's going to resolve quite a lot of the psychological issues with most bodybuilders, because coming off the back of it, if you don't have a plan in place in the future or in that 6 to 8 window of, hey, right, we know that in 6 weeks time, once we're out the recovery phase, this is when this is going to start here, that's all planned out for the next 50 odd weeks of the off season, you feel comfort in that. There's comfort in knowing that there is direction and this is planned and on purpose. But that needs to be addressed a lot sooner than people imagine. Like, we see people jumping into comp prep now, and it's like 16 weeks, like the old school bro ways, and done and in and out. But there's no appropriate timeline. Like, we should be drawing back the lens on a much larger scale and looking at things in the macro and a macro cycle, or a collection of macro cycles, potentially as long as you can into the future.
Yeah.
And people will always say to me, but yeah, things are going to change. Well, of course, because auto-regulating is part of our job. We need to be able to look at things on a weekly basis and make changes that may change our timeline slightly, but we need to have the overview set in place so we always have a good understanding of what we're doing specific to each phase, and we can plan appropriately. It's all about planning appropriately, because that's going to help navigate each phase appropriately.
Mm.
So you draw back the lens and you start looking at maybe 70, 80 weeks, 100 weeks into the future. And let's just say we start from the post-comp window. There's a couple of different ways you can go about post-comp. The most traditional and the most appropriate is usually going to be a recovery health phase.
Yeah.
Inevitably, after any prep, you are going to have to do a recovery health phase, no matter whether you're natural, whether you're enhanced. Obviously, if you're natural, it's going to be to get physiological adaptations back in place, from a hormonal perspective, from a metabolism perspective, your sleep data, physiological adaptations in hunger signaling, etc. Get those sort of more hedonic responses back in check.
Mm.
From an enhanced athlete's perspective, now we start to look a little bit more intricately at detail. We should always be checking blood work with any prep client anyway, natural or enhanced. But for the enhanced athlete, we take a look through blood work. That's going to define kind of where we go into this next phase. And of course, we have to assume that the client's goals have to be reflected in that. So the typical thing we're going to be doing, that recovery phase, we get 2 weeks post-show, take a look at blood work. Once the kind of fun settled off, maybe there's been some post-show eating and stuff, let some fluidity, hydration issues settle in electrolyte balance, etc. Take a look through blood work and address any issues that may be there. If there are issues that need addressing, that's what the recovery phase is for. And if there isn't, sweet, you run into the recovery phase anyway, but now we're thinking more about those hedonic and holistic things that are going on. So your physiological adaptations in sleep, hunger, generally psychological adaptations of how you feel mentally, get mental health back in check post-prep, before then embarking on that next big journey, which again is going to be very stress-inducive and fatigue including. Off-season is just as harsh on the physique as prep can be at sometimes. So once we've got that addressed and the recovery phase is nailed and blood work is appropriate, perhaps you've needed to drop PEDs down to a true replacement dose of testosterone. Perhaps it may be the most appropriate. For some individuals, if they've had a very good prep and their body has managed that stress appropriately, sometimes we can leverage things a little bit higher, maybe work somewhere between the 3 to 5 milligram per kilogram scale of PEDs and total anabolic use. We kind of class that as like TRT plus in inverted commas. Whenever someone says to me, oh yeah, I'll drop back down to TRT, I have to say to them, was it true replacement dose hormones, or were we a little bit outside of that here? Where
Well,
were
there
we
is
on?
confusion there, isn't there, as to how you read that, and especially bodybuilders versus general pop, as it were. There's going to be differences there.
100%. And where is replacement dose on an individual? If they haven't done blood work to find that out, then you don't really know. We have guidelines of, say, with males, like sort of around 100 to 150 milligrams of testosterone per week, roughly. So you say someone sits at about 125, but there's a lot of genetic into individuality. I've got clients that maybe sit at like 50 milligrams per week TRT, and some that will sit at 200 milligrams to achieve true TRT replacement. But that's an individual factor. So again, blood work is important, not just in the post-comp window, but that should be assessed way, way before. And again, tying back into the periodization being so long, there's a lot of information you need to collect and data that needs to be assessed on the client before you even get to prep. But once once those issues have been addressed, you can now start forecasting properly into the future. We've got the guidelines of how long we need to go for prep. We take a look at the goals here and we say, right, we've got judges' feedback. If they're going to look at competing again in the future, the off season should always be specialized or targeted around making improvements to get you back on stage again. So you appropriate the timeline accordingly. So obviously we're thinking about a seasoned competitor, someone who you may have been working with first and foremost. You've probably got past data on perhaps the total drug use in the previous off season. This is going to be very important for you to plan the next phase. And let's say you never quite reached the peak tolerable dose for an individual. So now you're going to plan that off season out to essentially kind of address that. Of
Mhm.
course, goal dependent. If you're looking at someone chasing an IFBB pro status, or maybe they're a pro looking to get on the Olympic qualification, they're inevitably going to take a little bit more risk to achieve the higher reward.
Yeah.
But it still has to work within the parameters of health. Like maybe they'll push things a little bit further, but they're not going to go excessively into dangerous territory. But again, you've got timeline there in the off season to periodize your drug protocols appropriately. So working on the milligram per kilogram scale, you can start to escalate and titrate up to a new prescribed peak load that again would be slightly higher than your past load where everything was tolerable. The blood work was all in check and the stress they was under was fine. You'll check blood work again at the peak point of that first push. That'll give you the data you need to move into the next phase.
Mhm. Mhm.
If you get to a point where you find that peak stress, then this is ideal data for us because we now know that for you, for health, for this individual, we work within these parameters always within the off season. We can't get away with taking any more because from an ethical basis of a coach, I'm not comfortable pushing you into a point where you're going to jeopardize longevity and health in the long term.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but the off season again is a perfect opportunity to look a bit deeper into health as well. We can use the analysis of echocardiograms to assess. This should be done sort of for me once per year minimum with clients.
Mhm.
If there's anything that requires further detail and further looking into, maybe once every 6 months to monitor it a little bit closely. But for the most part, once every year. And then we've got comparable data to then compare back from previous echocardiograms to now.
Mhm.
And we can also then forecast again further into the future a risk reward model 5, 10, 20 years down the line. So you're looking at echocardiogram data. If say there was no change on this prescribed drug load that we handled in this off-season push, we can now say if we did this again 5 times over, we can theorize likely we're going to see no change in 5 years' time because you're handling a drug load that was manageable and your tolerable limit was within range.
Mhm.
If we
Mhm.
saw any slight change, just hypothetically throw some numbers at it, 0.0001 mil change in the LV diameter, we forecast 5 times that change into the future if we keep your drug load here. And it allows you to forecast longevity and health perspectives for a client that they may not have had or may not have realized and weigh up, is the goal that I'm trying to achieve actually worth it? Like, what have I got to do to get to that goal?
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure. And I think as well, going down the route of the safer use model, which is what we're normally talking about, it's very different to someone doing something like Anavar all year round, all the time. There's different compounds that come in and come out depending on whether you're in prep or whether you're in off season or recovery phase. Like my own drug load has definitely changed since coming off the back of prep, but it increased I remember when we spoke and Primo went in, that went in. It wasn't until I'd done most of the prep that we brought that in. So there's strategic placings of the compounds during a prep and then for them to come out off the back of that.
And I mean, female periodization now, I mean, if you dive down that route, on that point of your preps area, you was looking at making use of that super physiological window at the minimum point of duration of exposure with
Yeah.
appropriate dosage to avoid as much virilization as physically possible. We can say like that, 4 to 6 week window at no more than 70 milligrams max total usage is appropriate for most females. But again, genetic response, some females will see virilization a little bit quicker than that. But in the most case, that's kind of where we're sitting in our safe area in inverted commas. But again, periodization for the off season, you come off, you've gone back into HRT, you've got all your health markers back in check. Now, perhaps if you're still chasing progression and looking towards the next goal of competing, you might periodize on the off season a little window to maximize that super physiological range again, because on a 12-month span, realistically, a female could get away with 2 stints of super physiological dosaging, maybe 2 4 to 6 week blocks. So you could periodize that into the off season. So at the peak of their push, when they're going to gain maximal benefit from that, when food load is at its highest, we've got to a good point of training accumulation. We've really got the runway going in the off season. We've built up a good amount of momentum. Slot that in at the end before your maintenance and before your pre-prep phase, where you're going to again tidy up and get some things back in check from maybe a blood work perspective after your peak drug load. Again, ties into male and female there. Once you've enjoyed that little window of super physiological dosing for the female, or when the male has got to that top prescribed drug load for the off-season push, they're going to transition into a maintenance and they're going to let those adaptations settle off, go back into check before starting again the next stressful part of the journey, which is prep. And the process kind of begins again,
Yeah.
where you're titrating back up again, getting to those peak points, checking blood work, checking health parameters. But compound selection, like you mentioned, is quite important.
Mhm.
Obviously, coming into prep, in a fat loss phase, we're trying to maximize a cosmetic look at the end. And there is perhaps drugs that may be more appropriate to driving those processes. There are certainly more oral compounds, like you mentioned, Anavar there. Not so much in females. I don't find the use of orals in females really necessary or appropriate, because dosaging is, of course, one of the biggest factors of avoiding virilization. And we start looking at compounds that come in, 25 milligram, 50 milligram tablets. You're not going to sit there crushing them up on the scales and weighing them out. It kind of just, it's a bit weird. You're just not going to, not when we have more appropriate injectable steroids that can be dosed so much more appropriately and with a lot more accuracy being the definitive answer there. Because again, if you smash up an Anavar tablet, how much is actually in the amount you weigh up on the scale of what you think you're taking to what you're not? You could have majority of that tablet in this, what you think is weighed out correctly. You don't know, because again, they're pressed, they've got other compounds put in them to solidify them and press them in, make them so they are oral, to be taken by oral administration.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of abnormalities and potentially impurities there that you don't know.
Yeah, also obviously the safer use model, it's smaller amounts of various compounds, which is why it's marked as the safer use model, because you're able to not OD on one compound and just use that.
Yeah, completely. And tying that back into males there, of course, we're going to take a larger risk trying to drive that cosmetic effect at the end of prep. We're going to use compounds like Winstrol and Anavar to aid in strength and performance outcomes during the prep. Potentially look at Anadrol or Halo testing in a peak week to try and maximize again that fullness and just finish off the look. Maybe not always appropriate to every individual, but for the most part, for individuals chasing kind of excessive goals in bodybuilding, we're going to utilize those compounds that are methylated orals, those last few mentioned there, Anavar not being methylated. That are going to drive up, again, large concerns for health, large issues on your liver enzymes, AST and ALT, acute liver damage, things that need to be addressed there at the end. But again, thinking about female specific compounds, primobolan is quite a safe one to use in female supraphysiological dosaging, because we have data and clinical data on its use in clinical application in females prior. Same again with trenbolone, which is something I know is a very controversial topic to say to a female, hey, let's input some tren here. But realistically, tren's original clinical application was for postmenopausal HRT treatment in females. So we know that it has been passed and deemed safe for human use in a clinical setting. So it could be something we consider, and it does have a very acute and unique use, being a synthetic progestin to help manage females with their testosterone to estrogen to progesterone ratio on the back end of prep there. If you wanted to maximize HRT efficiently, and it is something you should really consider, or a progesterone mediation of some kind, whether that comes from typical contraceptive pill mediation, using a progesterone only pill to kind of bring that progesterone input in towards the back end of prep, or whether it is using trenbolone as a synthetic progestin to kind of drive and mediate that. But yeah, it's compound selection is very, very important, of course, and it does tie back into the periodization. And there are prep-specific compounds, and there are compounds in the off-season that would be more appropriate. And again, we think orals, they have such a large cost and degree of health concerns. We limit the use of exposure to the back end of prep, perhaps even the last 6 weeks, or even more acute than that, like with Anadrol and Halo testing. We're not trying to drive the same performance outputs that powerlifters do when they use these compounds, trying to drive that acute aggression and things like this. So we wouldn't use them for extended windows of time. I don't really see why they would either, but they do. So we would limit that exposure again to very minimal. So it's not a compound or drugs that are appropriate to a time when we need to be leveraging our androgen loads and our total anabolics used to quite high amounts, which of course in the off season, when recoverability is favorable and we are in a more optimal environment to handle those stresses, why would we input drugs like that are going to drive in that? We need to have them in for a long duration of time, right, to maximize those effects. So we're not going to use the harsher, more stressful health negative drugs. We're going to stick to injectable compounds that we know are tolerable over long durations of time, and dose them appropriately for the individual.
Yeah, and of course stims come under the bracket of what you would use in a prep and not use off the back of that. I mentioned before about keeping stims in for the first part off the back of the show on a lower dose, just to try and help the food focus, and other options there as well. But generally the point of call is to come away from things like stims, because you're going into off season, you don't need that there. But it's, people don't know the information. You don't know that you only use certain compounds for prep, certain compounds for off season. This is why that planning needs to come into place, and the thought and information here.
I think it's just more, they are more appropriate to either of the phases more so. Like people could still use them, that's up to their own discretion, of course, but where are they most appropriately used? Like what is the goal of taking that compound specifically? And why would you take that risk in the off season and jeopardize health when we could utilize, like we know that all anabolic and androgenic steroids all secrete muscle protein accretion and muscle protein synthesis at roughly the same rate. So you're not gaining any additional benefit by having these oral compounds in the off season, like people seem to believe for some reason. They put them on pedestals the same way as they used to put trenbolone on pedestal for some reason, but they all roughly do the same job at the same rate.
Yeah.
So you're just taking a larger risk. This kind of ties back into the safe use model of looking for clinically approved drugs that we know were passed and deemed safe to use in human beings. Obviously, we do take the boundaries of that quite far and push out of what clinical data and studies can kind of reference to us, but we opt for a safer option there, always.
Yeah.
It seems ludicrous to push the health parameters when we know it all does the same job. But again, it's past knowledge and myths passed down from the ages that these would be more appropriate here because they do these unicorn things within the body that we now know they've done. Yeah.
Of course, going down the assisted route as well, if you're working with someone as a coach, it's there is not trial and error is probably the wrong word, but sometimes people react to different compounds in a different way. Putting the primo in, we could have looked at DMP or different avenues as well. So it's not always one size fits all either. It's that individual response to the compound.
Always, yeah, that's always something that has to be considered. There are genetic responses to compounds that don't tie into what we see in literature or what we believe in most anecdotal references. That trenbolone is just always the pinnacle that I refer back to because it's the most common one where we see such large variances between individuals. There's such a dose specific response with people. There are people that can tolerate extremely high doses of tren and they'll tell you, oh, what's the problem with running 500 mgs a week? I was fine. But some individuals, like myself included, you scale past 200 mgs per week, and the neurotoxicity and that detrimental effect that I notice within my psychological response is ridiculous. The variance is quite clear. It's just very easy to analyze it with trenbolone because it seems to be so acute, or more commonly spoken about, I guess. But again, it ties back into all steroids. Same thing with every single part of vector or variable that we're looking at with individuals. There's genetic response to everything. The same way there's a net tolerable testosterone dose of every individual, looking at their conversion to estrogen and DHT. There's that genetic individual response to everything. And it's always, we can give overviews and we can give guidelines, but you must, as a coach, be able to interpret that in the moment, auto-regulate appropriately and look through data, look through blood work to make an appropriate decision on individuals.
Yeah, for sure. When would you sort of place blood work? So you said obviously a couple of weeks after the show when things have restored a little bit. So throughout a prep, would you do that before going into prep and then midway?
So blood work for me is kind of defined by when you reach peak escalations of drug load. This ties back it. So if you took a completely new client on, then you're going to need to do blood work more intermittently and regularly so that you can start to piece that information together as you go. So of course, if you've got a new client coming in who's using PEDs, you have no past data, perhaps on the prep, you're going to, well, I mean, that's not ideal to take someone on just for prep, as we know, but it happens.
Yeah.
You're going to want to look at it as frequently as is feasible, realistically, as the drug load progresses, so that you can make accurate decisions moving forward and know when the cutoff potentially is, or if you don't actually reach that cutoff, then all good, you're progressing through fine and health parameters are all in check. But with a client you've got that you've been working with for a few years, you should have a good idea to a couple of key pieces of information, then net tolerable milligram per kilogram they can titrate up to. Of course, that doesn't always transition into prep because, of course, the milligram per kilogram scale works off of a total milligram used divided by your body weight. And as we know in prep, body weight's going down. The stress you're under in prep is arguably a little bit more harsh than the stress you are under in the off season. We're in an unfavorable environment where recovery is going down. We're expecting clients and individuals to keep performance and training going up in this unfavorable environment. So the handling of the same net load is going to be inappropriate. So we have to then look at more of a total milligram used perspective through the transition of prep with male individuals, male clients, and assess blood work potentially at 6 weeks out before we then look at introducing perhaps those more toxic compounds that are going to drive up some more acute stress on the physique. When it comes to the post-show window, ideally you'd get blood work done as quickly as you can, realistically. Those compounds we spoke about that we use at the shorter duration of prep, they usually have quite a quick metabolizing time within the body, quite a quick half-life to reach half their blood serum level, and then eventually being fully metabolized. So we can kind of take an assessment sort of 1 to 2 days post-show, take a look through blood work. The only issue is, like I said, in the post-show window, perhaps the client's going to go and eat a load of food. There's going to be a lot of sodium changes and electrolyte balance fluctuations. Blood work is always massively skewed by hydration status. So it might not be a true reflection of their health if they've just had, 2 days of kind of eating untracked food and all of their sodium and fluid manipulations have skewed all over the place. So I tend to say like a week post-show, we get it done as the latest. Take a look through that. And then from there, we can make an assessment of how we move forwards. Now, in the off season, blood work, everyone always says that blood work should be taken every 12 weeks or every 8 weeks or so. And I do to some extent agree. When you're working with someone, a new individual, you kind of need to be on top of these things a little bit more appropriately. But I think once you titrate up to a first top milligram per kilogram, so a top peak load of drugs in the first stint of an off-season push, that's realistically where we should be looking at the blood work there. Like up until that point, we're not going to push you into excessive ranges with a new client. We're not going to be saying, right, we're going to go straight to 20 milligram per kilogram here. Yeah. Maybe we're going to titrate up to 8 milligram per kilogram in the first push. But we're going to check blood work at the peak point of stress. So this peak drug load is when your body's going to be under the most stress at the moment on the timeline. We'll check here. We'll go into a maintenance phase preemptively. We look through blood work when we're going through the maintenance phase, and we pull the drug load down, and we can go, right, everything's in check. No issues for concern. The next phase, we're going to take you to 12 milligram per kilogram. We're going to check again at the peak load of peak stress. And over time, you slowly get to a peak load where perhaps now we're starting to see blood work skew. Okay, on the next time we go around and escalate, we're going to stop shy of that, maybe 1 to 2 milligrams shy, and we'll see what stress on there. Eventually, you get a concrete piece of data that reflects an individual's tolerable load of what they can handle. There are, of course, other things that we have to influence, other things we have to consider that influence blood work. So as long as we have addressed the total environment when we're looking at that peak drug load, and we can say, right, this is 100% coming from the PED load.
Yeah.
So now we can make that decision.
Yeah, I think that's so important to get across anyway in regards to blood work, whether you're natural or assisted. There's so many people I come across that have never even considered blood work. But for me, it's always been a priority being natural and assisted. And similar to probably what you're describing there, I would normally in an off season do sort of 6 months into an off season for myself.
Yeah, with a natural client, you'd be looking at like when food's at its peak, you kind of rinse the extent of the off season. You may want to check there to see that everything's appropriately in check, because we know that obviously pushing food to the extent that we do as bodybuilders is not healthy. Natural individuals don't have the aid of using insulin or anything to help with their pancreatic function and their insulin sensitivity. So perhaps we're going to need to start looking in a little bit deeper to blood work, make sure the pancreatic function is okay, make sure everything's optimal. Should really be tracking that with blood glucose along the way anyway. But blood glucose, as we know, is not like a definitive marker of pancreatic function. There's quite a lot of other variables that can skew that data, like cortisol response and stuff. So always checking blood work is the best way to really say for definite that everything's all in check. Taking a look through heart health, lipid profile with a natural individual. Again, if you're titrating up in scale weight, you're titrating up in blood pressure, of course, alongside that. The more mass you have, the more body fat you accumulate, more fluid retention, more fluid will be retained in the physique. So checking your heart health, making sure that everything's okay on that perspective, even with naturals, is just as important. Again, those peak stresses is always referring back to getting to the peak load first, seeing how you're handling it, and then you can plan again for the next.
Yeah, for sure. And a bit like we've spoken about before, that post-show period with pushing up weight, it's when you go into that recovery phase and off the back of a show, the priority ideally is health.
Yes.
You're okay, you've got stage lean, and we all know how hard that is to step away from that. I speak from my own experience and working with people. You've seen sort of, I guess, your idealistic physique, but it's not a normal physique being stage lean. And to try and push up and bring your body weight up, you're coming away from an unhealthy, in inverted commas again, state to restore health. And I think sometimes if you can switch your mindset to that, it helps you embrace that weight gain period.
100%. Yeah, 100%. You need to change the goal. I think if someone comes off the back of prep and perhaps they see some negative skew in their blood work, it kind of gives them a bit of incentive for this health phase, this recovery phase. It gives them a goal because they see a reason for it. When blood work comes back ace, they kind of look at it and go, what's the point of doing this?
Yeah.
Why do I need to do this? Well, there's other adaptations we are trying to correct here outside of just blood work. So there is always a goal. Like we as coaches, or we as other competitors that coach perhaps will understand this, that there is other things we're trying to correct in, not just the blood work. So there is always a goal. But for a client to understand that, who doesn't really understand the processes their body are going through at the time, it's very hard to kind of quantify it. There is a caveat to the typical recovery phase that we do with most, like I said, it's appropriate to 99% of individuals. But we can look at individuals perhaps that have larger goals like IFBB Pro status or Olympia qualification or whatever it is, where again, maybe not even that as well. From a psychological perspective, like that client this hypothetical client I just mentioned there, that's looked at their blood work and everything's all ace, but they have a really struggle with just pulling back for a maintenance. At some point, they're going to need to do it. That's inevitable. But perhaps there's a window of time here where we can look back to the past at, the old school bro bodybuilders that used to always come out of a post show and go into the traditional post show rebound.
Yeah.
Now, we know that it's not healthy because 99% of the time, there is something we need to address, typically in blood work with enhanced individuals. But let's say hypothetically, we come out of this with the individual whose blood work is ace, even after using all those prescribed PED loads. They have a really big psychological issue with pulling back for the maintenance and the recovery phase. Perhaps we can continue the escalations and keep their drug load high, push them into a post-show mass, only if appropriate through blood work. I have to caveat this because I don't want individuals thinking this is something you can just do. It has to be appropriate. Perhaps that jumping straight into another goal of progression is going to be appropriate for them from a psychological aspect to give themselves another goal to work towards.
Yeah.
Then at the end of it, they're a little bit more inclined because they are burnt out. Like by the end of, if you do prep and then you do a massive block at the end of it, by the time you come to the deload, I can talk from experience, you are buckled. You don't want to train. You want to have a maintenance. So then you do the recovery phase there. And of course, blood work will need to be checked again at the end of that to make sure everything is all correct. But there's very, very rare circumstances where that's applied to most people. IFBB pros will probably, again, take a little bit more risk for that larger reward. Maybe their timeline is different. Maybe they don't have an extended off season before they've got to get back into the next qualifier, or pro going from pro to pro show, trying to get that Olympia qualification. They're going to take more risk and for the more larger reward. But it all has to be checked.
I think as well, it's quite relevant in regards to the difference between females and males. I think that sometimes from a female point of view, you can see things on Instagram or, whatever, see it in person. And you can see a lot of male bodybuilders, they can get away with eating a bit more post-show. Whether they're assisted or not is going to be involved in that. And, what they're doing on their next show, you see people eating things and then competing the next week and they still get good placements, and then people may look at that and think, oh, okay, so I can go and eat a load of shit and get away with it. But you need to remember the female and male differences, as well as assisted and natural differences as well, how you approach the post show or in between shows.
100%. The big thing with I don't even think these classes are gender biased, because if you look at it's just smaller individuals. It's smaller individuals, smaller structure, smaller height, smaller metabolic maintenance, caloric maintenance. And even if you looked at the difference between a men's physique guy and an open super heavyweight, what they can get away with is far, far different. And this is the same thing we like to male and female. It's not quite so much a gender bias or a gender difference. It's more so just looking at a lot smaller individuals who require a lot less food. And it sucks. It does suck. It does suck being that person. It's not nice. But there's always, you've got to deal with what you've got at the end of the day. And settling and accepting that is a big, big benefactor. But it doesn't mean you can't set things up appropriately to enjoy life again. You can't have get that word back in balance. You can't reintroduce things, right? It's possible to get life back in check. And like we spoke about the relationship side of things, building those social connections again. But if the focus is food post-show, the individual has a thing with a relationship with food and a behavioral thing that we need to address more so than anything, because it should be about reconnecting. It should be about getting back to health. That's what should be at the forefront of a competitor's brain. We know it's likelihood not, because you just spent a long time with food focus and your appetite and hunger signaling going through the roof. So we know they're going to be there. Those forceful thinking and that intrinsic drive to want to eat is going to be present. But it's important that they understand food focus is not the be all and end all of post show. It should be about getting yourself back in check, reassessing social interactions and social connections and relationships, And yeah, again, if a client has that big issue with me with I need to be eating this, okay, you're not prepping again for a long time, because you're off season. We've got a lot of issues to address here, first and foremost psychologically with your relationship with food, before we prep again. And perhaps it's a highlighting factor or an alarm bell that maybe this isn't for you.
Yeah, not the right sport. Because of course, bodybuilding, I described on the pod before, and I think I said about it when we jumped on, you know, I said it as a eating disorder named as a sport. And what I meant by that is, what you have to, how neurotic you do need to sometimes get in a prep. And that doesn't need to be a negative. But, if you were to look at how we structure each day, how we eat, how we measure everything, if it's the wrong not the wrong person, but, if it's someone that's got maybe some issues or mental health things they haven't dealt with, it can bleed into this disordered eating so easily. And it's scary because I don't think you actually know it's happening, speaking from my own experience as well, because because I say it's labeled as a sport because it almost makes it okay then, if you see what I mean.
100%. No, the biggest thing I try and talk, I've had many conversations about this exact topic on bodybuilding. Bodybuilding is extremely attractive, and I think people resonate with it who have disordered eating or behavior issues around food. Why? Because it's a very easy way to mask up your problem
Yeah,
or
because
the
it's like
issue.
I'm a sport, it's
I
a
don't
sport.
want to, sorry, problem's the wrong word because I don't want people to feel bad, but the
Yeah,
disordered eating or the issue that needs to be addressed, it becomes very attractive to be a bodybuilder, because you can just say, it's hypothetically someone who deals with anorexia. It's okay because I'm on prep. It's okay because I'm on prep. I'm doing 2-3 hours of cardio a day and eating dust because I'm on prep. It's fine. It gives you validation for the problem. Same way with binge eating. It's okay because I'm in the off season. I'm trying to get massive. Yeah, rah, rah, rah. And perhaps because you started taking PEDs, you kind of get away with these things a little bit more so than you did when you was natural.
yeah,
Just it's very attractive, and it's a very easy way to mask those issues up. But on the same caveat to that, people that come into bodybuilding with the pure intentions of just wanting to compete and enjoy progression and test themselves, it can quite easily breed disordered eating over time.
yeah,
I've had a big issue, perhaps not with a specific eating disorder, but being able to step back from tracking and being so militant. And something I've had to develop over time is being able to step away from macro tracking and being able to step away from knowing every single individual piece of data.
yeah,
There was times where I used to go on holiday and I'd struggle because I couldn't do what I normally do, and it would shut me down. I wouldn't be able to function.
yeah,
Whereas
yeah,
now, over time, you learn to develop and you progress in yourself and you grow. And now I'm in a state where I can go away on holiday and informally eat and practice informed eating, and know that I'm not going to change the singlest bit on the scale weight or look when I go away for 2 weeks. But this is something that takes time to learn, and you have to go through these processes. But again, bodybuilding is very easy to breed these habits along the way, and we don't realize they're happening
yeah,
because
for
we're
sure.
so focused on the goal that we don't look externally at everything else.
Yeah. And also, I think that I used to definitely cripple myself with what other people would think. So
Yeah,
I felt that if I didn't track everything and if I didn't eat a certain thing, if there was other people present, then I wasn't a proper bodybuilder and I couldn't say I'm a bodybuilder because I was eating, I guess I would call it intuitively, or, it's just built in me. I always go, what protein am I going to have? And then I choose the carbs and the fat. And, I can much more openly pick things from a menu now. But before I'd study menus, and you were probably the same by the sounds of things, I'd literally be scanning through menus thinking, right, I can't go there. I'd ring restaurants before and say, have you got this in? And it became like, it was an enjoyment for going out for a meal with friends. It was like, oh, I've got to do this, so I'll stay on track, rather than I'm going to have a nice time.
the whole point of the meal was to step away from bodybuilding for 5 minutes of your life and enjoy those social interactions, relationships. But instead, you find yourself sat there looking at the menu on Chronometer or MyFitnessPal, like,
Yeah.
that's I can roughly track that. Right, let's see what's going on here. And before you know it, you've wasted half hour, 45 minutes of your night, and everyone's looking at you like, what the fuck are you doing? I just want to order my food and have a good night. Like, you've already ruined the whole purpose of this time.
Mm,
It's very easy to get in that habit. It's very easy to fall into that mentality. And I think that it's that typical like Dorian Yates kind of mentality of like no days off, live and breathe bodybuilding. But you know what? Yeah, Mr. Olympia or someone competing at the Olympia or an IFBB pro, this is their profession. This is their day job. They are going to do this every single day of their life
yeah.
because that's maybe what's appropriate for the goal. Even then, they still have balance and still enjoy life when they can.
Yeah,
You
and of
don't.
course it's labeled bodybuilding, which is building your body. So you don't even have to compete if you're a bodybuilder. It's something that you're working on for yourself. And I think sometimes a bit like the disordered eating angle, you can become so institutionalized in this being like it has to be pristine all the time. Again, speaking from experience and yourself, I've visited some very, very lonely spaces with being so neurotic about getting everything to the absolute letter. Like, yeah, it's crazy. Sometimes I think back, I don't know about you, but I think, Christ, I don't know how people could have been around me.
Yeah, I had well, I mean, even recently, me and Zoe talked about my last off season and how I'm going to do things differently this time, because I'd always tried to. I'd never really found my balance with being able to do both. It was either in my earlier years, it was all one way, whereas 3 days of cheat meals, as I used to call them back in the day. Obviously, off plans is more appropriate. Free meals, whatever you want to label them as now. But
Yeah.
it's 3 days of eating food in excess Friday, Saturday, Sunday, because I checked in on the Friday and I knew I had Monday to Friday before I checked in again. And
Okay. Yeah.
it was the complete skew of where I went in my last progressive off season, because I knew I had to make some serious progress. And I was like, right, what haven't I done? I can switch it on for when I'm in a fatless phase. I can switch it on for when I prep. But whenever I've gone into the off season, something's always slipped at some stage. So I did 18 months of everything nailed 100%, and it buried me into the ground. It drained me. It was mentally hard, and it felt like prep. It did. By the end of it, it felt like prep again. But it got to a point where I was macro tracking all of my off plans to make sure everything was nailed. I had to. It took me about 6 months to even have an off-plan meal, because I was so fixated on I've got to be 100%, and I burnt out. It took many conversations with Zoe going, "What are you doing? Like,
What's
wind it
this
back
for?
in a little bit. You like
Mm,
need to wind it back in a little bit. We can't. We're not living life because you can't miss a meal, and we want to go on date nights, and you're bringing your chicken and rice. Like, what the hell?"
yeah. Yeah.
But you have to skew both ways to kind of find your middle ground again. And
Mm.
it wasn't until the end of it that I kind of started to have like the last sort of 10 months where I was having off-plan meals, but I was still meticulously making sure that every single thing was tracked to the letter. Like, we should in the off season be able to step away from tracking for at least one meal, surely.
Yeah. And also food is there to be enjoyed, making memories and just having a bit of fun. With the first time I was able to actually sit down in an off season and look at a menu fresh without looking at it online before and thinking for 5 days, oh my God, I get to eat this and I'm visualizing it and all of these types of things. It was so refreshing to just open a menu and go, I think I'm going to have that. And actually, I sometimes think as well, with bodybuilding, because it becomes so intense, the stress response to that, sometimes just taking your foot off the gas and being able to have a nice meal with friends and family, keep active during the day, train if you want to. Actually, the response to then getting a good night's sleep because you're taking your foot off the gas a little bit can actually have such a positive effect on the rest of your week, on the rest of your, time as a bodybuilder and enjoying that off-season phase so much more.
100%. Stress is one of the biggest things that gets in the way of progress.
Mm.
Physical progress, mental progress, everything comes from stress getting in the way. And it's stress management is the biggest game we play in bodybuilding, stress and fatigue management. But we always forget the other factors of the allostatic load. Like, it's not just physical stress from training or dietary stress, it's mental stress, it's emotional stress. And you sat there at the meal, or me sat there at the meal at the time, tracking and everything, that is inclusive of stress. It's driving up a lot of stress in the body, and you're sat there worrying and driving up a lot of anxiety and issues psychologically that are going to hinder your progress in the long term. And like you rightly said, you're better off just going enjoying the meal, de-stressing for 5 minutes, and the next day you'll wake up looking better.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure you as well recommend to clients, things like when you're coming into the off season and that transition phase, your activity and some of the things that you would do in prep, but to a lesser degree, like we've sort of touched on. I always say to people on these days where you may be incorporating off plan, keep active, do your steps still, keep your hydration up, still eat some food during the day so you're not ravenous by the time you sit down for the meal, and try and I think as well, with that, if you can have some protein feedings in the day and keep it a bit lighter and not be so hungry when you sit down, you get more enjoyment as well. And just trying to strategically place and think about these things before you go into it and not find yourself suddenly ordering everything because you're starving and then you go into this sort of cycle of I shouldn't have had that, etc., etc.
Excessive overeating in the time of the meal.
Mm.
A very useful tactic I've got for that is preloading. So instead of you can set your training up, set your expenditure up through the day to have a slightly higher step count. You can manage your food across the day if you really want to, but a useful tactic prior to going and eating a free meal, having a protein or a veggie serve half hour before you go and consume the meal, you're going to fill up some dietary space. You're going to start to feel more satiated, so you're going to be a little bit more full, and you're going to have less intrinsic drive to pick the massive food option, or even the food that you do get. You're probably going to eat less of it or be less inclined to overfeed because you've just had that protein serve, you had that veggie serve sort of half hour beforehand. So the signal to the brain of fullness is kind of lingering. The hunger signal is dropping down. You're not going into the meal starving. Like, this is one of the biggest problems. If you go into a meal absolutely ravenous on the hunger scale, like a 1, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, it's scary as well because you've got the unsatiable appetite off the back of a show.
Yep.
So then suddenly, you've got this freedom and choice, and it can really, it's like a domino effect, isn't it? You have the first bit, and then suddenly it's like you're going through the whole deck, and it's hard until you've done it and you come away from it and you can reflect. Have you worked with clients that have gone too far the other way and they've maybe gone into the binge eating territory and they can't get back on track?
They can always get back on track. This is the thing I have to stress to people, that the concern or the thing that gets in the way for me is communication. If you don't communicate to me that there's an issue, I don't know there's an issue. So my expectation is we're going to get to checking. You've not highlighted anything to me that there is an issue, so I can't help. My job here is to help and support you. Like we said earlier on in the podcast, support is the most important thing, but it's a double effort. You've got to be from both parties there to make this work. And of course, post-show, there's plenty of examples I can think of clients who have struggled with binge eating. The tactics to kind of resolve it are simply, from some aspects, some individuals like to understand what's going on, and sometimes just going into the scientific side of things and explaining to them on a call, like, this is the process your body's going through. This is the mechanisms we're dealing with right now. It is a completely normal response. So you're not weird, you're not strange. You're not broken. You are completely normal. And this is how we fix it. And in the meantime, you're still going to have these inherent hunger signals driving you through the roof and making you want to overconsume chocolate and ice cream till you throw up. They're still going to be there, but this is how we manage them. Now let's think about urge surfing. Let's think about, instead of trying to, or changing your environment, perhaps. Atomic Habits is a fantastic book by James Clear. Absolutely love it. And his application of Atomic Habits about setting your environment up specifically for habit building. Like, we can translate that into managing food and hunger and appetite by setting up the environment to limit these triggers.
Yeah, that's work.
If the food is not there and it's not in visible sight, and you don't have those, even if it's in your peripheral vision, like, that's subconsciously in the back of your brain. Like, you see the cookies there. If there's cookies on the side or a bunch of flowers or some fruit, you're probably going to go for the cookies. I don't know why I used flowers as an example.
Yeah, I was thinking, we're edible flowers.
maybe they are. But yeah, the point remains the same. If you have the foods available and around you, perhaps changing the environment is one way to make it easier for you to manage. It's not going to cure it, but it will make it easier in the time whilst these adaptations are going through. Front loading or preloading, I want to call it as well. Getting your little protein serving and veggie serve before you go and eat an off-plan meal. Fantastic way to, again, decrease the amount or potential to binge eat there. But then urge surfing as well. So instead of trying to forcefully try and control these psychological adaptations that happen and try and just ignore them or just shut them out and shut the door, accepting them, but understanding they're going to go. So you just ride the wave for as long as you can. And if you do consume foods, one of the biggest things to highlight is the frequency is going to matter with cravings. So if you are going to have something, have it once. But take a chocolate bar, for example, the easiest example here. Don't have a couple of squares in the morning, because for the rest of the day, you're going to want to eat the rest of the couple of squares. If you're going to do it, save it for the end of the day. If you can work it into your food, appropriate. Get it worked in and just have it at one sitting. But if you split that up, you are setting yourself up for craving and addictive behaviors. Frequency is one of those things that drives that process.
Yeah, I really like that, actually. Something I spoke to a client about the other day is she finds that having chocolate bars, sometimes it can lead to having more of that. And I said to her, this time, why don't we try and do it when you have like a savory meal, have your meal, give it 10, 15 minutes, and then have your bar of chocolate after that. So you've already eaten, you're starting to digest, then you have the chocolate bar, and then see if that curbs that sort of wanting to then, because of course, you know, things like chocolate bars, it's empty calories and you don't feel like you've eaten anything.
Again, that kind of highlights a good thing for clients to understand is the difference between physiological hunger and appetite and cravings, because they're two very separate things, but may feel very, very similar. And the way to understand it is, if you go and eat a serving of vegetables, you're going to cure physiological hunger. It doesn't matter what you eat. If you are physiologically hungry, having the vegetable serve or eating something really bland and shit is going to stop that feeling.
Yeah.
If it doesn't stop it, it's not physiological hunger. It is appetite driving it, and it's not a necessity to survive. It's not a survival mechanism telling you to eat here. This is up here. So now you can kind of separate the difference between the two, and now you can try and manage it appropriately.
It is crazy, isn't it? Like when you look back at a prep, when you've got those set targets and you've got that definite goal of stepping on stage, I find myself like there's no option to not follow the plan. But then suddenly when you've got this sort of freedom, and I'm sure a lot of people relate to this who listen to the pod, it's like suddenly you're so fucking hungry, but you've lived on hardly anything for X amount of time. And you think, how did I do that for 6 months? And now suddenly, you know, I just want to eat everything. But like you say there, the quality of the food and the food you're having, these foods that are higher in calories and maybe more processed, they don't fill you up, and they may satiate you, but they will often lead into wanting more of that satiation. And then you're on that track of potentially losing control.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, it's crazy. And like we always say, we've been there, like we talk from experience. And, you know, I really do think that what we've touched on, including the periodization of PEDs, but the post-show stuff, it's so relevant at the moment. There's a lot of people coming into this period, and it's important to know that they're not alone. You know, it is a learning curve, and everything you learn can be lessons, and it's trying to be kind to yourself during this time as well. I'm sure you'll agree.
100%, 100%. You're not alone, like you said, Sarah. And the biggest thing you can do that's going to help you is communicate. I will stress that until I go blue in the face. Communication is key for every aspect of being a client or a coach. It's all about that two-way relationship.
Yeah. And if anyone does listen to the pod and, you know, it resonates, if people are wanting to inquire about coaching or, you know, send you a DM, follow you on Instagram, is that the best place to find you?
Yeah, so for any of my educational content, which is slowly picking up now, I don't have prep brain. It's slowly coming
Oh,
back.
lovely.
You can check me out on Instagram at flexcoach_George. Obviously, there is a link tree in the bio there, dropping your application to look into coaching with me. Alternatively, you can go through the Flex Success website, where you'll find all of our coaching services and any of the other services we offer within paid consultations. And if you'd like to check out more of my personal stuff, then go onto YouTube and you'll find me under George Wilson or Flex Coach George. And then you'll see all my educational content there as well.
Oh, awesome. Expansion is in, my friend. And I know for you, coaching is such a passion and it's something you are looking to expand more. So it's really nice to get you back on the pod. And I'm sure next time you're on the pod, you'll be even more into off season and you'll just be unstoppable. Like we say, it's not till sort of 6 to 8 weeks into off the back of a show and you think, blimey, I did feel like shit.
Yeah, I think I'm at 6 weeks now. 6 weeks? Yeah, I think I'm at 6 weeks now. So I've just started crossing that threshold where everything's coming back now and I'm starting to feel like I can really get stuck into life.
Yeah, for sure. So get ready, people. George is about to blow up on Instagram. But thank you for your time again, my friend. And I'm sure we'll get you on for number 5 in the future.
Sarah.
See you later, mate.
Peace out.